let's talk BYU quarterbacks for a moment here. Now, each position group we will go through here. We'll talk about the highs, the lows, and then we'll essentially kind of assign a letter grade to each position group for the 2023 season for BYU. Now, with regards to the quarterback position, it was one that had a whole lot of promise. Any of you who watched or had talked about the quarterback position for BYU in the lead up to the season thought, okay, this is a chance for a guy like Kedon Slovis to have a redemption year and really show that what he was at Pitt was kind of an anomaly. He's more of what he was at USC. I think we all were talking about that. I was talking about it. I know on this podcast I was talking about it. I was talking about how I thought he was going to bounce back and really show what he was capable of. The coaching staff at BYU was very high on what he was capable of doing. Well, the stats indicate that Kedon Slovis ended up having a 57.5 completion percentage, averaging 6.5 yards per attempt for 1,716 yards, 12 touchdowns against 6 interceptions. Frankly, those are pedestrian numbers. Now, like I said, he did not play the final third of the season because he obviously got injured against Texas, had an elbow injury that he could barely grip a football. I feel like that injury was far more serious than the coaches wanted to let on and lead up to some of these games late in the season against both Oklahoma as well as Oklahoma State. I believe that if they needed him to play, he could go in there, but he'd be severely limited. I don't think that injury was anywhere near 100%. That's my personal opinion on the matter. I just don't think that he had the same zip on the football. Now, Jake Retzlaff came on in relief and ended up completing 50.4% of his passes for 648 yards, 3 touchdowns against 3 interceptions. Yet again, even more pedestrian, if not downright worse numbers than Kedon Slovis. And that was across 4 starts for Jake Retzlaff. So not even averaging 200 yards per game in his 4 starts for BYU. Now, Jake Retzlaff did offer more of a rushing element. He ended up running for 116 yards. Crazily enough, he was the 3rd leading rusher on the season for BYU, despite playing just 4 games. Also had 3 touchdowns, which tied for 2nd on the team, along with, it was Keelan Marion, and as well as, I think, Kedon Slovis had 3 rushing touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Kedon Slovis had minus 41 yards on the season, but did have the 3 rushing touchdowns. LJ Martin leading the way for BYU with 4 rushing touchdowns on the season. The quarterback position as a whole, disappointing. There's no doubt about it. It really was a big part of why BYU struggled as much as they did this year. You needed a transcendent performance from a guy like Kedon Slovis to really overcome what BYU is dealing with. Now, quarterbacks don't exist completely in a vacuum on their own. They need players around them to give them opportunities to make plays. Now, the wide receiving core had issues with injuries. The running backs had issues with injuries. Offensive line play was woefully inadequate for most of the season until kind of the final few weeks of the year, and that's disappointing. But the quarterback play left a lot to be desired. Like I said, Kedon Slovis, I think he came in with a lot of hope, a lot of pizzazz, a lot of hype about him, but just ultimately did not deliver on that. Jake Retzlaff, and let me just say this. I still think there are tools there for Jake Retzlaff to hone his craft as a quarterback, but man, does he need a lot of work. Do I think he's going to be QB1 at this juncture going into next season? I don't think so, but he has the opportunity to prove it. Now, ultimately, in this day and age, could he decide to transfer out of the program and find another program to call home? Sure, that absolutely could be something he decides to do. But I just think he is as bought into BYU as BYU was bought into him, and I think he'll be sticking around. The other quarterbacks on this roster include Cade Fennegan, who was the backup for the first 8 games of the year, simply due to the fact you didn't want to burn Jake Retzlaff's red shirt because Cade Fennegan already has burned his as a transfer previously in his career. Cade Fennegan, it feels like if he wants to stick around BYU, he'll forever be a depth piece for BYU. I just don't see him progressing and trying to make a push for any significant amount of playing time at BYU. It's a similar circumstance, I feel like, for Nick Billups. Now, Nick Billups is a guy that came to BYU as a transfer in his own right. He is still crazily, both of these, both Cade Fennegan and Nick Billups are both sophomores still. That's kind of indication that of how the COVID year has slowed some things down. Both of these guys have graduated high school, it feels like an eon ago. They're still only redshirt sophomores. Now, will that change? Could one or two of those guys, maybe both of them, decide to leave the program? Yeah, I could see that happening because I fully expect BYU to hit the transfer portal to bring in at least 1, maybe 2 guys. Cole Hagan, okay, he's a walk-on with BYU. His younger brother is coming to BYU as a wide receiver. I don't see Cole necessarily leaving BYU, and it's a low risk to leave him on the roster there. And then Ryder Burton, in many respects, the coaching staff is very high on his potential down the road, but is he going to be able to achieve that potential this offseason and make a push for playing time as soon as 2024? I don't think so. I think the whole idea for BYU with this quarterback position, I talked about this, was to have Kedon Slovis be the guy this year, get Jake Retzlaff some game action, let him be the guy next year and the year after if it really was as good as they hoped it would be. And then at that point, maybe Ryder Burton ascends to being the starting quarterback for BYU. We kind of set up a nice succession plan in terms of the quarterback position for BYU. None of that went to plan this year. Kedon Slovis was not good enough to be the guy, it felt like. And then the injury obviously knocked him out. Jake Retzlaff, his 4 games, that's a pretty good set. What am I trying to say? It's a pretty good I'm trying to, I just lost it's a good amount of games, or it's a lot of game film to be able to evaluate his skill set. And it's not adequate right now from him. Like I said, I do see tools from Retzlaff and why BYU believed he's capable of coming in and being the guy. This is a guy, might I remind you, who passed for 4,500 yards his second year at the JUCO rank. So he can sling the rock, but at this level of football, is he going to be able to process enough? Is he going to be able to overcome the turnover woes that really kind of been a hallmark of his 4 games for BYU as their quarterback? Can he overcome all that? We'll find out. And then, like I said, the future, it feels like in many ways, is Ryder Burton right now. The other quarterbacks on this roster, just simply put, aren't it. And I think that BYU will absolutely be hitting the transfer portal to bring in a body. You also have Noah Lugo, who will be joining the program via his commitment out of the high school ranks down in Texas. It'd be hard pressed, I think, to have a guy come in as a true freshman, even playing at a high level in Texas, to be the starter in 2024, but nothing is out of the question right now. My personal opinion on the matter is that BYU does not have their starting quarterback game 1 next year against Southern Illinois on the roster right now. Could Retzlaff ultimately end up taking that job, maybe via spring ball and what he does in training camp? Yes, he could. But just the 4 games of evidence here indicate that he is not that guy right now for BYU. So I would be hard pressed to say that anybody has a stranglehold on the starting position in 2024 for BYU, but they do have about 9 months now to get it right. Hit their recruiting trail hard. Obviously, you can uncover a gem or 2 in the transfer portal if you're Aaron Roderick. And you got to find a guy. You got to find a guy who can really help BYU elevate themselves, because quarterback play is at a premium in college football, especially at the Power 5 level. Those who have a transcendent quarterback, well, typically those are the better football programs in college football. BYU did not have that in 2023, and as a result, they're not going bowling for just the second time in 19 years. You don't want to miss a second time in a row, honestly, if you're BYU. Can they find the right guy? Only time will tell. I meant to mention this as well. The letter grade for the quarterbacks. I think the BYU, in terms of the quarterback play, I'd give it a solid C-, maybe a D+. It just wasn't good enough. BYU needed to be B+, A-, A type territory to really do what they were feeling like they were capable of doing this year. It wasn't good enough. So they need to get better. There's no doubt about that. And we'll see if they can rally and obviously find the right option or options via recruiting, or if Jake Retzlaff can take that step. But it's going to be an interesting 9 months ahead as we lead up to the 2024 football season. But we'll have plenty of coverage for you guys, as we always do right here on your daily podcast, the Locked On Cougars podcast.